Are you scratching your head on the most recent Google announcement? Universal Analytics is going away, folks. Pack your bags and get into GA4 with Krista Seiden today on The Edge.
Your weekly digital marketing trends with industry trend-setting guests. Powered by your digital marketing pioneers, Site Strategics. This week's featured guest is Krista Seiden, founder and principal consultant at KS Digital. Now, here's your host, Aaron Sparks.
Wix is the title sponsor of this Krista Seiden interview series. We're proud to have Wix as the title sponsor of Edge of the Web. You can learn more at edgeofthewebradio.com/Wix. Wix takes care of structured data markups for you and adds them by default to your most important pages, including your product pages, courses, and blog posts. Wix is a fantastic closed source CMS. We'll talk more about them today on the show. This is Edge of the Web Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Sparks. Every week we bring you amazing guests to chat about digital marketing, news, and trends. We unpack a key marketing topic for our digital marketing audience. So whether you're a part of a company or a marketing firm or a freelancer, this show is for you. Make sure you check out all the recent shows over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. Just want to let you know who will be coming up on the show in the next few episodes. Coming up, Jason Bernard and Bill Hartzer. Make sure to check out the recent shows, Johnny Ross, Mattol Gandhi, and Mark Traphagen of SEO Clarity, as well as product-led SEO from Eli Schwartz. If you're interested in being part of the show, drop us a line at info@edgeofthewebradio.com. Set your reminders to YouTube as well to get notified when we set these videos aloft there. Be sure to go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge today. Hey, we'd love to hear from you. Go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge today to give us some feedback on how we're doing or what you like about this podcast. We're eager to hear from you. Help us share the show with the digital marketing world. Again, go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge. Make sure you check out the weekly news podcast that we have as well, and accompanying to our interview series. It's covering the most recent digital news of the week and much more regarding Google updates, all things digital marketing, with our regular co-host, Morty Oberstein, over at Wix. You never know what we're actually going to say or what he's going to say and what I have to clean up after. So go check us out as we roll through the news each and every week. So with that said, let's turn around. Let's meet this week's industry expert guest, Krista Seiden. Let me tell you about Krista. Today's guest has a decade of experience with digital analytics, and it was first seen by members of our team from the Google Analytics Academy training videos. Her courses include subjects on Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics for beginners, advanced analytics, and power users. She's had over 100 speaking engagements all over the world, including Google I/O, MozCon, Conversion XL Live, SheerLove, SMX, and Opticon. Her website is currently covering all the important details of setting up and moving to GA4. And that's why we wanted to have her on the show today. So welcome to the show, Krista. How are you doing today?
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I'm really excited to dive in and to talk to you all about GA4.
Fantastic. I couldn't hear a better geek line right there. Let's dive into it. Hey, but I mean that in all compliments. You realize that, right?
Of course.
Well, before we get started, why don't you give us your history in kind of your own words? How did you get to where you are, being able to be kind of the Sherpa to be able to see us up the mountain of GA4?
Yeah, for sure. So I like to say that I kind of fell into analytics as a practice. Back in 2008, 2009, I was working at Adobe and I was doing business analytics there and kind of just some general business reporting. I was making a dashboard every month for the CEO. And I started to realize, I was emailing maybe 30 different people for all the metrics I needed to pull into this like kind of business unit wide dashboard every month. And I realized half of the metrics that I was actually asking different people for were coming from their web analytics platform, Omniture.
Oh my gosh, yeah, there's absolutely. There's the blast
like,
from the
why
past.
do I know, right? Why do I need to bug all of these different people for these metrics? So I went over to the analytics team and I said, hey guys, how about you just teach me to use this tool? And then I don't have to bug you every month. And so they sat down and they taught me, exactly what I needed to pull for the various reports. And then fast forward maybe 6 months, 8 months, 12 months later, I can't really remember, but Adobe bought Omniture.
Hmm.
And at that point, then I had the ability to take all of the Omniture learning courses for free, which, if you remember way back in the day, those were not cheap. So I was really excited about it. I convinced my boss, like, hey, I'm going to dive deep on this and learn this. It's going to be really helpful for the business. And I dug in and I really enjoyed it. And actually, my role ended up pivoting into more of a web analytics role there. I ended up leaving Adobe and I went to a company called the Apollo Group, where they had the free version of Google Analytics. This is before GA Premium. So this is like 2010, 2011 timeline.
Got it.
The free version of Google Analytics on a website that was getting like millions of visits every month. And the sampling was just absolutely atrocious, as I'm sure some people have experienced. And so, I had to get really, really creative to figure out ways to actually track meaningful data in Google Analytics back then. I ended up going from there actually to Google, which was really funny at the time, because if you had asked me then, I was a huge Adobe Analytics fan. I actually got the Apollo Group onto Adobe Analytics.
Hmm.
I was not a Google Analytics fan because it was, it was only the free tool. It was really heavily on the sampling. And so, I went into Google as a product marketing manager running analytics and optimization for what is now the Google Cloud Group, was then at the time the Google Apps for Business Group. And I was, like, I was cautiously optimistic that I would be able to actually do something with GA there. So I ended up being in that role for about 2 years. I completely ripped out GA when I got there, because I realized that it had been set up to double, triple, quadruple overcount everything based on, competing for cookies and multiple implementations, and it wasn't working. So we started from scratch. I simultaneously built a A/B testing program, or a growth program, where we scaled from 0 tests to up to 100 tests in a quarter. It was really fun. It was really fast paced. And the funniest part about it is actually the week after I joined Google, I was at the same conference as one of the GA team members, who was a leader on the team. And he's like, hey, what, you came to Google? Like, why didn't you tell me you wanted to come to Google? I would have hired you on my team. And I was like, oh, I didn't know the GA team was hiring.
Oh,
Um,
man.
and so he was like, hey, look, we're going to have coffee every quarter. I'm going to keep you updated on what's going on in GA. You're going to do some speaking events for me on the side, and I'm going to eventually convince you to come to the GA team. And we did just that. Every quarter we met. He kept me up to date on what was going on. I got to give direct feedback to the PMs. And eventually I moved to the GA education team
Hmm.
as the evangelist for Google Analytics, which is, according to your intro, how your team probably first encountered me.
Yep.
I wrote and taught all of the Analytics Academy courses for Google for Universal Analytics. It was really fun. I got to go all over the world and teach and train and speak at conferences. And then my last 2 years at Google, I also took on a secondary role on GA, where I was actually a PM for Google Analytics.
Hmm.
So I kind of held 2 roles at the same time. I guess I should have been getting paid twice the amount, but that's a whole nother story, right? So I actually helped build the very beginning of Google Analytics for 2 years. I was there from the very start of it. We had some, really intense war rooms thinking about this brand new product that was going to change the analytics industry as we knew it, and really saw that through up until I left in February of 2019. Since then, I have been running my own consultancy,
Hmm.
KS Digital, and I now focus on strategy, implementation, teaching for analytics clients. So I work with some of the world's largest companies to help them implement analytics in a great way. GA4 education has, of course, been a really big focus of what I've been doing. I still blog a ton. I do a lot of free YouTube videos. And then I also focus on building out courses specifically focused on Google Analytics for KS Digital Academy. So I have several courses now. We're just launching a brand new course at the end of this month, focused on technical deep dives into GA4 to help actually set up Google Analytics 4 from a very technical perspective, talking about actually debugging in the browser and setting up consent properly and all of these really deep topics, which of course is now very top of mind for so many people because, just recently, as you're well aware, Google has announced the deprecation of universal analytics. So, it's been a really fun and interesting more than a decade, probably closer to 15 years at this point, just doing analytics and seeing the transition of this industry. And I think we're at a really exciting point where, GA4 is essentially going to be taking off. And I'm really excited to be kind of working in the middle.
All right. So to all the audience of The Edge, I think we've got the right person in the show to actually unpack everything that we have questions about. So thank you very much for that preamble, because that gives a lot of clout to a number of things that you're going to be answering today. So thank you very much for that.
Mhm.
We'll probably be contacting you in the near future as well for a little bit of consulting as well. All right, so let's back up here for a bit of history of Google Analytics. Won't do much, but I mean, you've guided us on the more recent history. Back in the day, in 2005, Google acquired a web analytics company called Urchin. That's where a good deal of this comes from, and that was 20 years ago. And Urchin was actually developed in 1998 and gradually revolutionized the way customers came to be able to engage with their online mediums. So there's been a number of revisions over the years here. We can't explore all the revisions. However, I mean, there's some major changes in 2007 and 2008 as it integrated with AdWords, Google Checkout, and the like. We've been in Universal Analytics, GA3, for about 6 to 7 years. Am I correct there?
Yeah, so UA actually came out in 2012, in kind of like, we're announcing this new tool, kind of like GA4,
Yeah,
right? Where
exactly.
GA4 has been around since 2019 in some iteration.
Yep.
So UA was announced in 2012, but it wasn't until probably 2014 that it was that forced migration to Universal.
And Universal was a monumental upgrade because it actually started focusing on the session, not the hits. So it expanded us into a full understanding of return sessions, new users, and it gave us a lot more behavior dimensions than what we previously had with previous versions of analytics.
Yeah, it's definitely a change there. Like users who would have been familiar with the previous version, which was classic analytics.
Yep. There we go. It's like
is
classic Coke, exactly.
Yeah. Urchin became classic, classic then became UA. But you'll remember you had things like custom variables, which were, kind of tied to, different areas. Now we have custom dimensions in Universal Analytics. So there's definitely been a change over time. And then even within UA, there's been changes over time where Google has tried to get us more used to this idea of users, where, sessions is still such a fundamental part of UA.
Right. The sheer fact that everything up to GA4 was still built on a platform that's been 20 years in the making. It makes perfect sense that there should be an upheaval, a rebuild based on what we're experiencing now as it's cross-device, cross-platform type of tracking that we need, that we have been at a loss for a good portion of the ability to track inside of UA. Last year, Google signaled that what they were going to do with the app and web factors of measuring mobile apps as well as websites within the same property. Can you expand on that a little bit? That was a kind of a pre-warning of GA coming at us, right?
Yeah. So GA4 was actually first released as a tool called Google Analytics App Plus Web in the middle of 2019. And so that was kind of an open public beta of this new idea of doing analytics in a combined way with app and web together, as you mentioned.
Right.
And then fast forward to October of 2020, and Google rebranded App Plus Web as GA4, and they called it, the new way of doing analytics. And at that point, Google was starting to signal that GA4 is going to be the way forward. They started to say, okay, this is going to be the new default property. When you create a new property in Google Analytics, you're going to get a GA4 property. You can still create a UA property, but we don't necessarily recommend it. Although I think anybody who has been using analytics would, say otherwise.
Absolutely. And we also know signals from Google whenever they heavily encourage use of a particular platform that, it's going to be there. But the messaging that this was an upgrade, they say that it was, but it truly is not an upgrade. This is a whole new platform. And to kind of quote Chris Mercer from Measurement Marketing, he's saying that this is to be able to measure today's world, is coming from today's world's type of behavior, and it's arming us for the future. I'm sure you would agree with that, as you're one of the founding members of GA4, yeah? We're proud to have Wix as a sponsor of our Edge of the Web interview podcast series. They're always building. Check out what's happening on Wix. Fresh off the press, bot log reports get an easy understanding of how bots are crawling your site without any complicated setup right inside of Wix. There's so much more you can do with Wix. You can now add dynamic structured data, upload redirects in a bulk, including error notification and warnings, and fully customized meta tags and robot.txt files. Visit today, wix.com/SEO to learn more. Wix, always evolving.
Yeah, totally. I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you said that universal analytics really was built on this kind of code base or this idea that is over 20 years old now. It's not working the same way that, the web doesn't work the same way 20 years later as it did previously. And we have been in need of this new way of doing analytics. If you think of all of the newer analytics products out there in market, things like Heap and Mixpanel and Amplitude and several more, they're all operating on this event and parameter or event and attribute data model.
Right.
And that's not what we're getting with Google Analytics 4. So it's much more structured for kind of the way that we do measurement now, especially on the app side of things. And it adds the ability to bring that data together across both app and web, which is something that we really couldn't do before. Like, yes, you could combine your app and web data in the same property in Universal Analytics, but it wasn't really the same data model. It wasn't really speaking the same language. And it didn't tie together a user identity. And those are all promises that we now have in GA4. And so, yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is the data model for the future. I think it's, the platform changes that we really need. But, that's not to say it's not going to be, a tough transition for people to learn an entirely new tool and a new way of thinking about and doing analytics. Like, it's definitely a change.
That is absolutely the key. And we want to be able to get into that with setup as well as kind of a mindset change. But from the analysis side of GA4, there's a key foundational element. It's the concept of the inaccuracy of data. GA3 or Universal Analytics, it didn't have the ability to measure a user because of opt-in or cookies or what have you, right? Or JavaScript not firing. It just wouldn't record that session. GA4, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is built on the concept of, yes, there's going to be inaccuracies. You're not going to have all the data at any point in time. But what we can do is algorithmically start creating a modeling behavior to be able to understand and extract behavior analysis and start creating a larger predictable model of how people are actually interacting with your site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So GA4 is built on this idea that we're going to be getting to this cookieless world, right? We're not in the same place that we were 5 years ago when, there was no real legislation and restrictions on what we were doing with user cookies. And so, it's a whole new world, especially if you consider not just things like GDPR and CCPA, but also ITP and, browser changes. It has made tracking anything on the web much more difficult. But GA4 is built in a way that it is, just like you said, algorithmically, it's using things like conversion modeling and behavior modeling to try to tie together conversions and other areas of data that just don't exist because a user hasn't accepted consent or, they don't allow cookies or something like that.
Right. So as an example, Universal Analytics hits types of information like page hits, events hits, e-commerce hits. And again, what I'm trying to do is make sure that all listeners to the show, to whatever degree that they have had experience with analytics, understands and we can get them all kind of ramped up to this conversation. It's been about hits as opposed to events. Google Analytics is event-based with the principle that interaction can actually be captured at an event mindset. So the announcement that Google actually came through with in mid-March is that Google Analytics 3, Universal Analytics, is going to be sunsetting by July 1st, 2023. And you cannot also migrate your old data from GA3 to GA4. I think that was the biggest crux of a lot of contention there. But to also add into this, we're not going to be able to see our data of old GA past 6 months after July 1st. So that was almost like an additional insult to injury as we're looking at all this. We have to get through this particular threshold. The old Universal is not ready for this new world. We've been, however, camped around Universal with a heck of a lot of customizations of custom reports
Mhm.
and custom saved data, as well as annotations. We'll get into that in a second. But it doesn't travel over to GA4, let alone the mindset change that digital marketers need to have. So
Yep.
it's going away. I kind of set it up here, but why are people so afraid of GA4? And I know this is your baby, so I'm absolutely being careful here. Why
That's
are they?
fine. I take no offense.
Well, why are they so afraid of GA4?
Look, this might be a little bit of a controversial statement here, and it's probably a little bit harsh, but honestly, you've had the past year and a half at least, if not 2.5 years, to start to get familiar with GA4. It's been out since October of 2020 as the tool from Google. They've been telling you all new development is on GA4.
Mhm.
You need to focus on GA4. I get that, people look at the tool, they say, well, it's not ready, so I'm not going to do it. But I do want to say that I think a little bit of this transition and not having historical data is kind of on the user at that point, right? Like Google was telling you that you needed to transition, and most people did not really put any effort or thought into that. And I get it. Like I said, the tool wasn't particularly ready, and so it is
Well,
what it is. We're
yeah.
now here.
Well, Krista, I'll say it so you don't have to. It's because we've all been lazy.
Yeah, I won't say that. Like I said, there was a lot of reasons why people didn't do it.
Yeah.
But you could have, right? So as of the announcement in mid-March, you could have had a year and a half of historical data in GA4 already.
Absolutely.
I've been around GA4 for quite some time, so I've been running GA4 for almost 3 years on my sites. But it is what it is. We're here now.
Sure.
So my first thing that you need to do is go ahead and get GA4 set up right now, so that you can have historical data.
And
I
this
think
absolutely can run concurrently. There's no conflict.
yes,
There's no data signal conflict.
yes.
There's no effect on bounce rate nullification with two scripts running at the same time, right?
Yes, no impact. Definitely run it. That has been Google's guidance up to now, is
Mhm.
to run it dual tagged
Mhm.
side by side with your Universal Analytics property.
Yep.
And so, absolutely, if you haven't done this yet, this is the first thing that you need to do after this call is go set up GA4 and start collecting historical data. But this gets us to this point of what do we do? Where is our historical data going? As you mentioned, on July 1st, 2023, if you are a free customer of Google Analytics, Google Analytics, Universal Analytics will stop collecting data. As Google put it, for a time of at least 6 months after that date,
Mhm.
you will continue to have access to your views. So you can view your Universal Analytics data. But at some point after that, they are going to cut off access. They
Mhm.
are going to be deprecating Universal Analytics, including the ability to view your data.
Right.
Now, this is probably also a bit of a controversial statement, but how often do you really look back at your last 10 years of data? I've had GA Universal Analytics running on my blog, KristaSeiden.com, for the past 10 years, a little over. I just looked at it the other day. I stretched the timeline back 10 years. And honestly, that was the first time I've done that in years. And it was more of just, I'm just kind of curious. So, yes, it is a loss. I'm not saying that it's not, but realistically, you're probably looking at month over month and year over year data in your analytics account. And, COVID's been kind of a whirlwind on everybody's data. And
Mhm.
so there are some businesses that would like to be able to look back 3+ years by the time we get to that deprecation date next year, because these middle couple of years have just been so crazy.
Mhm.
But 3 years ago comparison to now is like, that's kind of a tough comparison when you're talking about actually running your business off of that old data, right? So yes, it's a loss. I'm not saying that it's not, but for your actual business day to day,
Mhm.
I think what's really important is that you have month over month and year over year data. And so Google did give you 15 months notice to get GA4 set up, so that you can at least have year over year data by the time that deprecation date does come around next year. 360 clients will get an additional 3 months on top of that. So their deprecation date is October 1st,
Oh, okay.
2023.
Yep.
Not a lot of added benefit there. I've seen a lot of comments out on Twitter that people think that these dates are going to be moving targets, and Google is
Right.
going to,
Right. Right.
see that everybody's really upset and give you more time. I'll tell you, I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't count on that if I were you. But you can hope. But I think people have been hoping for the past 2 years that GA4 wasn't going to be a thing, and now they see that it is. So,
So
take it with a grain
to
of salt.
summarize here, and I'll make it with a little bit more pointed stick than Krista does, and I do appreciate how diplomatic you have been delivering that message. But one, it's been around for a while. Why didn't you actually get it measuring when you were supposed to? Two, our data over the last couple of years was pretty weird anyway, so why not start looking at things with fresh eyes? Three, you don't really need 10 years of data to begin with, because how often do you actually look back? And we also know how different website content change has been going on for 10 years. So there's no real, if you're actually doing regular SEO and structural changes, it's not really a good comparison anyway. And then finally, right, you're measuring the wrong things. You should not be measuring views or sessions. You should be measuring users. And that's the entire premise here of why we have GA4, is to get us out of this old mindset and get us into more user-based, behavior-based, events-based measurements. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got pretty much all of it there. One thing I will add, because I do know that getting data out of universal analytics is a very important thing for people, is
Right.
there are ways to do that. There are a lot of data connectors. One that I particularly like is Supermetrics, that you can actually export your data from universal analytics and save it. Save it in a Google spreadsheet, save it in BigQuery. They have different connectors for different reasons.
Yes.
If you put it in a spreadsheet, you can put Data Studio on top of it and visualize it. So one of the things that I'll be doing, one of the things we're actually going to be teaching in my new technical implementation course is actually for migration, how you get that data out, right? Like, it is important. We're going to leave people with a template where, and I encourage everybody to do this, create a Data Studio template where you're pulling in some of your most important KPIs, your user sessions, views, goal completions, those kind of things that you've looked at over time. If you need to look back years of historic data, you can pull that out of universal analytics and visualize it in a spreadsheet in Data Studio, something like that, so that you do have that historical data. So I think that's another thing that we do have the next year to explore, is how to get that data out, how to visualize it so that you can have some record of that data. So the access to it is going to be going away sometime after January 1st, 2024, that kind of 6-month grace period after data collection stops. But that doesn't mean that you can't start to plan ways to get that data out and save it yourself now. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of tools that come out that are focused specifically on that. It's a great business case if anybody's looking. So, I think that there will be options and, really nice tools that are going to surface in the next year.
And you've got a year to be able to do this migration as well. So you've got plenty of time. You just have to incorporate that into your agency model to be able to, the most important thing is to track as quickly as you can and be able to implement. I do want, before we get into your blog regarding quick implementation, I did want to cover a couple things that are being lost in Google Analytics 4. One of them is views. You're actually missing views out of the entire equation. And I know I can hear the silent screams of SEOs whenever they actually are saying that, but we're also missing annotations. Now, I was listening to Marketing O'Clock here for prep for this show, and they literally said, "I bet that could have been done in 2 hours of work by a Google developer. Why in the world we don't have annotations as the ability to be able to place dates on different events that are happening on the site?" I'm sure
I don't disagree with you.
I'm sure this is a cake that's still being cooked, right? So it's enough to actually now stable enough to be able to move properties in there. I'm sure we'll be getting some additional features well along the way. This is the new world for analytics right here. And, Google's making their sizable investment. By the way, folks, it is free. You guys realize that this is a free platform,
Everybody complaining about this free tool. Oh my God,
why
is Google doing this? You're the most awful people ever. And yet they just can forget that it's the free tool.
Yeah, you could be blind the entire time, or you could be paying, for some premium dollars each month. I date back to log query analysis. I mean, there was some places back there where all you had was a squid log to be able to understand user behavior. You talk about some poor user experience models there. Anyway, another thing, just to get into my rant mode here, there's no site speed metrics at all in Google Analytics. What's going on there?
Look, there is a long list of features that are, missing or just don't yet appear in
Okay.
GA4. We could spend probably the entire
All
podcast
right, I
episode
won't do it.
talking about those. We're missing views, conversion rates, product scope dimensions, annotations, like all of the things
Got
that
it.
you've mentioned, and so much more. But Google is accelerating the pace at which they are putting these out, right?
Understood.
On the announcement date, there was still no landing page dimension. That was one thing that SEOs were so upset about,
Oh,
right? Is
wow.
I use this landing page report in Universal Analytics all the time. There's no such thing in GA4. Well, 2 weeks later, Google finally launched a landing page
There you go.
dimension. It's
There
now
you go.
there. You can build your landing page report. So I think yes, there are still things missing. I think we're going to get a lot of those things back in GA4.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to get the concept of views back. I'm sorry.
That's not a bad thing.
Charging
That's
for
the
that
thing.
functionality in the 360 product,
Right.
but they're going to be introducing other ways to help you filter and get to kind of reporting visuals of some of that data and those slices that you need. So, I have faith that it's going to get there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not trying to put you on the answer block for Google. I'm just really kind of channeling some of the tumult that's in the ecosystem. We're proud to have Site Strategics as a sponsor of Edge of the Web. We're pioneers in the agile digital marketing methodology. Core specialties that we provide are technical SEO, including core web vitals optimization, search engine marketing, social media marketing and management, focus on conversion rate optimization, truly focus on results-based marketing that works. We've also developed a unique omni-channel media marketing and content curation process that's guided by our weekly R&D. From our Edge of the Web interviews, we incorporate the best techniques for our content broadcast strategy and execution. If you're interested in what we can do for you, just give us a call at 877-SEO for Web or 877-736-4932. One thing that's actually really good to see is the dismissal of bounce rate. We are not seeing that anymore. So there's a cheer from the crowd.
This is a funny one, right?
Yeah.
I think, I have been a long time advocate for not using bounce rate. It is not my favorite metric. In fact, I think I have a whole blog post on my blog about why I think bounce rate and time metrics are awful in Universal Analytics. So I have always, encouraged people not to use this metric. In GA4, it came out with the idea of engagement rate instead, or an engaged session. And this is essentially somebody who's been on the site for at least 10 seconds, they've done a conversion event, or they've seen at least 2 pages on the site. It's just, trying to get to a more positive look at people are actually engaging with the site. If you want to calculate a bounce rate, it's essentially the inverse of engagement rate, but keep in mind it's not the same.
Right.
Because it does have these parameters of 10 seconds, 2 conversion events, or 2 pages, a conversion event, those kind of things. So it's not going to be the same as the bounce rate you have in UA, and I think that's actually a good thing. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was a few people on Twitter recently who just noticed that bounce rate as a metric has shown up in the API for GA4, which means it'll be coming to the UI soon.
Oh.
But again, it is actually the inverse of engagement rate. So it is not the bounce rate from Universal Analytics. So when you're trying to compare those things in the future, do keep that in mind.
Got it. And again, the point was that was a terrible signal to try to interpret, because you really, you could make an argument either way on behavior, if they found what they were looking for, or if they didn't, right? I mean, literally,
right. If you have
so
a long
much
scrolling
interpretation.
page,
Right.
if you have a long scrolling page with all the information somebody needs, or even like a Help Center article, right? Where people are Googling some specific topic, they come to the Help Center article, they read the whole article, they never have to click or engage with the site really, and then they leave. That would have been counted as a bounce in UA if you didn't have something like scroll tracking to count it as, some kind of an engagement. So, I think it's better, because in GA4, this would now not be a bounce, and truly to your business, that was an engaged session.
Exactly. Well, I'm actually a proponent of getting rid of the bounce to begin with, because again, signal interpretation, and you're wanting to remove interpretations out of the equation as much as possible. Well, I shouldn't say that. these type of high fallacy interpretations. All right, pivot around real quick. We want to go through your blog, 10 points of actually setting up GA4 real quick. And we're going to swing around in our second segment and talk about training and talk about mindset of how to analyze this data a little bit differently here. But you have the ultimate guide for setting up GA4, 10 steps. One, create the Google Analytics property. At any point in time, interject into this and give us a little bit of a guideline here. So creating a Google Analytics property is very easy. It's right there in Analytics. You can spin it up as another profile, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Another
It's just a couple
property.
clicks.
Yep. Install the GA tag via GTM. There's not two tags, there's just one tag that can ride right along, right? As easy as that.
Yep, there's the configuration tags. If you're going the GTM route, which I highly recommend,
Sure.
it's a lot more flexible. It's just the config tag. Just doing that gets you page view, user collection. It also gets you enhanced measurement.
Very good. Along with that, setting up the GA4 event tracking, inside of GTM as well. So if you have a UA event tracking, does that actually carry over?
Ooh, so this is an interesting one. If you're using GTM, no, you will need to retag for all of those events that you want to track. And this is step 3 of the guide. It is as involved as you want it to be. If you have a bunch of CTA buttons on your site, if you have a bunch of things that you want to track, you will need to create event tracking for them. I highly recommend that you take the time to actually think about how you're going to name those events. The event naming structure is very, very different in GA4 than it was in Universal. In Universal, an event was category, action, label, and it was a unique combination of those 3 dimensions. In GA4, it is an event name and up to 25 parameters for free customers. And so you have a lot more, potential dimensions to work with there, but you don't want to go that unique naming route that you had in Universal. You actually want to reuse event names and parameter names, and they're distinguished by the values of what those things are collecting. So I have a whole other set of educational materials on that specifically, but it's really important to think about. But back to your main question of, does my UA tagging translate? If you are, instead of using GTM, if you're using GTag hard-coded on your website for Universal Analytics, you actually can use that same code essentially in the setup process for GA4. It gives you, there's like a migration feature, which allows you to say, yes, use my GTag code. But what this does is that it will translate all of your Universal events for you. It'll say, whatever you had for action of that category, action, label hierarchy is now going to be an event name. And whatever you had for category and label are going to be parameters for that event name. And so if you have hundreds or thousands of unique combinations of category, action, and label, and you didn't have a great system for doing those in the first place, your GA4 implementation is going to be super messy from the get-go. So I personally don't recommend going this route, but it is there for people that don't have the resources to put a lot of time and effort into this migration. But again, I don't recommend it. GA4 is going to be the platform for the future. It's going to be around for many, many years to come. You right now have the opportunity to implement it in a meaningful and structured way. And so I would, personally recommend that you take the time to actually think about that and do that.
I think as a pause here, just thinking back, we've seen messy event customizations on a lot of different build outs of UX, especially with different third parties jumping into the mix. They never clean up their mess before they leave. Usually you don't even have access to it after they get fired, right? So you've got stacks and stacks and stacks. I've seen one that has close to 300 to 400 different events that they're tracking. And it's like, all right, well, again, it gets back to the same thing, mentality of how much are you really looking at? If it's not important, it's just hanging around, it's going to be messy. Having taken this opportunity to have a fresh set of eyes going, what are we really tracking? Yes, you're going to have some blindness as you move from different properties, but actually assessing the patient and actually seeing what are we really trying to track, it gives you a perfect opportunity to have a reset, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that is what I work with my clients on. So I've done a lot of GA4 implementations over the last couple of years. And not one of them have I done kind of a strict copy paste from
Yeah.
Universal, because the way that I look at it is, we need to, Universal was set up for the business of yesterday. We need to set up GA4 for your business now and for the future.
Very good. Very good. Step 4 along the way here, enable enhanced measurements for web streams. You want to speak to that briefly?
Yep. This one's super simple. This comes out of the box when
Mhm.
you just install the GA code snippet or the config tag. It's actually on by default these days. It used to be off by default. But what you want to pay attention to is there's 6 events that Google can track for you out of the box, things like scroll tracking, outbound link tracking, etc. Just leaving it toggled on is great. If you have specific things about your website, for example, your query string parameter on an internal search box might be different than kind of normal, maybe Q or keyword or things like that are some of the typical ones. There's like an advanced option in that enhanced measurement setting where you can put in whatever your query string parameter was. And you would have set up the same thing in Universal already for site search tracking. So it's just kind of paying attention to some of those advanced settings in enhanced measurement. But
Got it.
overall, really great feature. I love it because I think it democratizes data implementation for users who are not going to do a lot of additional tracking. Just out of the box, they're getting a bunch of additional events that are pretty meaningful for them.
Understood. Understood. Moving on, adjusting your data retention rates. You're speaking to going for 14 months. That's different than the maximum retention that UA had. Can you explain that to our audience here real quick?
Yeah. So GA4 was built with kind of a privacy mindset, right? And so data retention is front and center. Out of the box, it's going to be set to 2 months. And so you probably want to go into the settings and change it to the max for free customers of 14 months. 360 customers will have many higher tiers. You can go like 26 months, 52, et cetera, all the way up to do not delete, similar to what
Oh,
you have
wow.
in Universal.
Yeah.
Um, that doesn't mean that you are going to lose your data, though. I think there's a lot of confusion over this
Absolutely.
where
Let's talk
people
about that.
think that, okay, my data is going to be deleted after 14 months. What good does that do me? They're not deleting your data. What it means is essentially there's 2 different ways that Google is showing you data in the UI.
Mhm.
In the reports that come out of the box in the reporting UI, those are all coming from aggregated tables. That data doesn't go anywhere. It's not
Okay.
being deleted. That is going to be there forever. So, 2 years from now, you can look back and see all of those aggregated reports in the UI.
Mhm.
It's the reports that you're accessing with Explore, kind of that deep dive functionality in GA4
Right.
that are impacted by this 14-month date because it's accessing the data in a different way. It's not pre-aggregated. It's kind of just a whole raw table of data.
A good
And
and more
so that
fluid
is the data
interaction.
that's
Yeah.
being
Understood.
exactly.
Understood. So,
So you won't be able to access the Explore data past 14 months, but you can export it to BigQuery and have access for forever.
very good. So again, it's more of like the working data set that you can actually manipulate and mold and get a good deal more insight. You won't be able to have those type of functions on the old data set. It won't be malleable like that, but it's still going to be available, right?
Yeah, it's still available. Anything that you can do in the reporting UI, like adding a custom dimension or adding a comparison, is still going to be available. So you'll have that forever.
Got it. Got it. All right. Number 6, link. Integrate with Google Ads, DV360, Search Console, BigQuery, and more. We certainly want to talk about BigQuery in our next episode here. Integrate, basically plug everything back in. The number of things that were already plugged into UA won't be there until you reconnect all the leads, right?
Yep, totally. So if you're using Google Ads and you're using your Google Analytics conversions or goals from UA
Mhm.
for that, you'll want to set up that link and start to use those conversion events instead. You'll want to link BigQuery. Big change here with BigQuery is that every customer of GA4 now gets a free export of BigQuery. That's huge,
That's
right?
cool. Yeah.
Everybody now has access to that data, whereas before it was only 360 customers paying up to $150,000 a year for Google Analytics, and
Right.
now it's free. So I think this is a huge value add to GA4.
That's amazing. We'll certainly unpack that a little bit more in this next segment. Quickly, the last few points here. Number 7, make the GA4 user interface work for you. That's a customization process. And now you've
Yep.
got the data pulling in. What are you really wanting to see, right?
Exactly. For the first time ever, you can now customize the GA4 UI. You couldn't customize the UI in Universal Analytics. In fact, this is something that you could do in Adobe Analytics or Omniture for 15 years. You could
Wow.
change kind of the navigation bar and the reports that showed up. But now in GA4, you can do that. You can even make your own, customized left-hand nav area. Like in my account, I have an area called Krista's Faves, and it's just my favorite reports. So I have quick access to those reports. So really cool. And you can change the visuals and stuff that you're seeing there as well.
Very good. Very good. Finally, set up custom data. We can park that right there because that's going to be on you. You guys do you, right?
Yeah.
9, enable Google Signals. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so Google Signals is new to GA4, and this is essentially Google saying, hey, we know that this user is so-and-so because they are logged into Gmail on their phone, and they're also logged into Gmail on their desktop. So we can actually connect this user between their device, their app usage and their web usage because we know it's the same user. This is not Google saying, we know what you're doing in Gmail and we're sharing that with the Google Analytics account. Absolutely not. It's about the identity space and being able to tie that together. And it's an additional identity space that Google can add here in GA4 on top of user ID and device ID. So it really has much more ability to tie users across app and web with Google Signals enabled. And yes, it is privacy safe.
Very good. And finally, choosing your attribution settings. You actually have the ability to customize your attribution settings and throw things away that are not interesting to you.
Yeah. So for the first time ever, data-driven attribution is now available it's actually out of the box now, the default attribution model used for conversion events and revenue events. You can change that though, if you want. You can go back to that last click or last non-direct click attribution model if that's what you're used to and that's what you want to see.
Okay.
Really cool about this though is that it's actually a query time change. And so you can change the setting as many times as you want. It's not going to impact your data.
Oh, wow.
Other than, after you change it, it will update to the new model. You can change it back and there's no downside to
That's cool.
So you can actually check out how these different models impact your data and choose what the best model is going to be for you.
And that's one of the best things that we're hearing about GA4 is you can actually overlay different models to be able to have different insights, as opposed to what was legacy for Universal is that you change something, that data is lost. I mean, just even to reverse analyze something, the goal recordings in Universal have always been bane of my existence. So it's great to be able to see that type of experimentation on insight with this new modeling. So fantastic there.
Yep.
All righty. Well, we want to kind of pack up this segment. We're going to be talking about training and insights into GA. What are your recommendations for getting into the new mindset of GA4? Because I know you've got them, and we're certainly going to unpack more, but some quick leave-behinds on this episode. What should we prime our audience to think about?
Yeah, first and foremost, you just have to get hands-on with GA4, right? You need to get it on your websites, even at a very basic level, or you can use the Google Merchandise Store, which is Google's demo account for GA4, just to get hands-on and start using it. You need to really start to understand how things look in GA4 versus Universal, because they look very different. So I don't think there's any replacement for hands-on usage. But on top of that, of course, there's so many different blogs and training courses and everything out there that you can use to educate yourselves on this tool. But, first and foremost, just get hands-on.
Get hands-on. All right. Events and parameters, everybody. We want to make sure that that's where we're going. No longer views in the sessions. That's a thing of the past. So thank you very much for this episode. We greatly appreciate it. I know the Edge listeners also greatly appreciate that as well.
Thanks for having me.
Make sure that you listen to the second part of the Krista Seiden interview by visiting edgethewebradio.com. Follow Krista Seiden at Krista Seiden on Twitter, and follow us on Twitter at Edge Web Radio. Thanks to our sponsors. And make sure that you see all the must-see videos over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. If you can't wait for the entire interview, you can go see it on YouTube, on a YouTube channel. Just search Edge of the Web, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share this show with others, because sharing is caring. From all of us over at Edge, be safe, be well, and do not be a piece of cyber drift. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.